So on the bench today we've got some restoration work in. I've got 3 panels, okay, like this, that have come in. Now as you can see they're pretty broken, but you can also see, I think you can see on there that they're pretty bowed. I'll just put this batten on here. So you can see there that it goes right bowed there and up. I think you can see that on there. Now that's happened. It can happen for 2 reasons. One of them is that it's from air pressure in the building. As the doors are opened and closed, it puts a bit of air pressure in that pushes the panel. But usually when that happens, the panels will get looser. Now even though this is broken, you can see it's not wobbly at all. That's pretty solid. So with air pressure, because it moves all the time, it shakes the cement out. Now the cement's really well in all these. It's nice and still intact. I mean, you can see it's very dirty. I'll give it a clean, well, it'll be cleaned up, all the bits that are salvageable. But what's happened here is because the old pitch pine window frames, when they were built, even though the wood's seasoned, they still shrink over time. If you think, you know, over 100 years plus, there's quite a bit of, it's not to shrink too much to put pressure on the panel. So I think that's what's happened here. I could be wrong, but you know, that's literally as the panel is crushed, it flexes and bows, and then of course on this there's no straight lines to take any bends out, so it's broken across all the big pieces there. So luckily the middle bit has survived a little bit. There's a little break here, and so there's a couple of bits, but I'll need to replace on that. But yeah, poor panels, but they're beautiful panels. So I'm going to take them out of the frame now, and then we'll do a rubbing, and then also, well, re-lad them and recut the pieces. So to start with, I need to remove it from the panel, so I'll be using my lead knife. This is one of my older lead knives that I use for this, and I'll be breaking into the putty, because even though these look like they're just about to drop out, they are still really firm in the frames. So what I'll do first is I'll put my mask on. And I'll start breaking into the putty. Now I like using my lead knife more than a chisel, because you can see it peels away at the putty, and if you can get it in just where the wood is, there you go, you can see now that's got onto the putty. And I can take the bits away, so you can see underneath. Now I don't know if you can see, I'll get that one, oh lovely. So can you see there, here's the old lead, and you can see that's where it would be in the putty. So because the putty's gone dry and then the frames have shrunk, it's crushed it. But also what's happened, that powder there is what's left of the lead. So the lead's actually corroded within the putty to dust. So when I come to flatten the panel out when it's out, and I'll measure it, and I'll measure it against the frame as well, so it'll all, well, I'll make sure it'll all fit back, and there'll be a little bit of give for any further contractions, but hopefully the frames are well seasoned now. So I'll continue with this, and we'll be back in a minute. The next video will be once we've got the panel out. So I've now got to a point where I've got the putty all out from around this panel, and it's been pinned in. A black pin on black gloves, but it's been pinned in with those at the corners, and there's also some little glazing pins there around the edge, but you can see from where this has gone in there, you see there's little wooden packing pieces in there, and where they are there's also these little pins, but you can see where the lead has bowed out and pulled away from all those pins which would have been holding it in place at one point. So I'm now going to try and get this out. So with my lead knife again, I'm just going to tweak up there. I'm doing that, I mean this panel is sadly quite broken, but where I'm pushing that in is on where the lead joints are. So just to release that off, I push it into where the lead joints are. So that's partly if this piece here isn't cracked. So if I'd gone in there, I could have cracked that. So I want to try and avoid that so I can use as much as the original pieces as possible. I'm just going to tilt that way. It should come out. So I'll clean the frame up a little bit more just to remove the rubbish from that. I'll put it down there for me. So here is one bent panel. So what I'll do now is I'll clean this up. As you can see, that's pretty well bent. Just some gentle. I'm now just going to gently press that back to as flat as I can possibly get it. And what I'll then do, as you can see this here, that's been repaired at some point where they've put it up where it's pulled out. So I'll remove that and press the panel down so it's nice, as flat as possible. And also I'll then check the width measurements to the frame measurements and the height as well to the frame. And then I'll take a rubbing of that, and that's the next process, will be taking a rubbing of this. So I'm just going to clean this up and let it go flat, and then we'll be doing a rubbing. Okay, here we are. I've got the panel out and it's flat on the bench now. It's flat enough for me to take a rubbing. I've made sure I've got it working face up, so that's the smooth side of the glass. So when I cut, everything will be back. It is a symmetrical pattern, so I could have done a rubbing from the other side, but I prefer to do it all from the side that I'm cutting from. So I'll get my piece of paper. Over the top. So of course this is going to move about, isn't it? So I am going to use some sticky tape. Just pull that tight. So that's sort of holding everything in place there. If the bench wasn't dirty. So I'm literally going to rub over with my hand, because you can see my hands up. So I don't know whether you can see the pattern starting to come through. So I'm going to use one of my one of my cleaning brushes as well, and you can see. So because the paper's quite thin and the brush, I'm making more of an imprint at the minute, just so I can see where I'm going. And so what I use now as well, just so I can see roughly where the lines are, is a piece of lead. So, and literally rub that over the top. Now what this is doing, because it's round lead that's been used to make this, it's actually giving me the top of the lead. So it's, in effect, that's the centre line of the lead, so where the heart of the lead will be. But what I want to try and do is get a rubbing so I've got all of the lead in the face as well, and this will act as a guide for when we put it all back together. So I'll try and stick to the guide, but you can see here, it will show me where all the glass has got to go and the lead up back on top. And as the sides have gone, because the edge lead, if I get down to the, so that's where the edge lead is, that line there is the edge of the inside edge of the lead, and the rough line is where it's corroded off. So I want to mark that, but what I will do is I'll square it all up to make sure that I've got a square panel to the size of the wooden frame that I've taken it out of, and then it will be time to take the panel apart. Right, so I think I've got it all rubbed. I'm just going to see if I've missed any bits. And so you can see the pattern now. So this will act as a guide for when we're leading it back together. So I know I've got the pieces of glass roughly in the right place. So I will take the pattern off now. There. So you can see on here the edges are all rough. Where this is all rough. So this is 1/2 inch lead. So I have got straight lines here and here from the inside edge of the panel. So I'll take those as reference points and then mark out a 1/2 inch border from there, and also check if that is the right size to fit back in the wooden frame, because if it's too tight I'll have to adjust the borders here. So it would be the main bit here will stay the same, and I'll do any adjustments in the border glass here, either when I recut new bits or in the old bits as well. So the next stage after this is to take a photograph, so I've got a reference to this panel just in case I've missed any bits that any bits of lead that I haven't picked up on rubbing, and then I'll start to take it apart, and that's the next stage. Right, so we've got the panels out of the wooden frames now. I've given them a little bit of a clean, so it's not too bad. So it is time to start taking them apart. I've got my rubbing over here, and I'll be placing the bits of glass on there as I go, just to keep them all in place. So the first thing I'll do, I've got my gloves on, is I'm going to give it a spray with some water. Now what will this do is this will help keep the dust down, and remember all the cement that's in here and all the dust is full of lead and other rubbish stuff for you, so make sure you keep it damp. Now you can do it if you've got a big tray, you can do it in a water bath, so this will be underwater when you take it apart, and that's brilliant. That'll keep the dust totally down, you can work in the water. The only problem is then you've got to get rid of that water, which will then be full of lead and rubbish, so it should really be filtered before it goes down the drain. So I tend to do spray on there, and that will keep the dust down. I'll also wear my mask, and we have an extractor in the studio just to sort of keep the air circulating and filtered. But for now I'll just use the spray, so that's all nice and wet. Put my mask on. So you can see this panel is really quite smashed up and broken. so that makes it in some ways easier. On some panels the joints may have fatigued if it's wobbled in a door, and the panel may just come apart when you've got it on the bench. This is actually still quite firm because it's been a slow pressing with the frames that have broken it. So I'm going to start by taking the edge lead off. So just use my snippers. I'm going to go here because there's a broken bit. Pull it out, give it a snip. It's a case of just taking all the bits off. I've made a note on the thickness of the lead. I've also got the rubbing, and also I've noticed on this one the edging lead is actually 10mm. Usually it's half a mil, oh not half a mil, sorry, it's usually 12mm, half an inch on the edging, but this is actually 10mm. So I've made a note of that on the patterns. So I'm taking the lead off, chucking that away for recycling. So you can see these pieces here, they're quite dirty, they've got quite a bit of road film on. That you can see with that. So I've been giving them a clean. I won't clean this bit because it's a broken piece, but you can see it's quite dirty from all the road pollution. See that there? But I will clean those up, and I'll use just water. You see, a cheapy scouring pad brush. Don't use like Scotch Brite pads because they'll scratch the glass. Just some washing up, and gently give that a rub and clean it up. And if it needs a bit more to get it clean, you can use a methylated spirits and just help and rub that in. That should take it off. But because that's broken, I'm not going to bother cleaning that up because it's going to get replaced with a nearest match. So I'm literally, if you can see here now, so I'm breaking into the panel. So I will take all these off and work around the edge, but I'm using the lead to help me take it apart. So this piece of glass here, so you can see the lead is stretchy, so I can pull that out, and using my snips I can snip that, and that'll break. When I get into this piece I can take those bits out, but that's another broken bit. I'm saving the better bits because some of these may be able to be used elsewhere on the pieces that are broken. But it's a case of just taking it off, snipping it and giving it a wiggle, taking the piece out. So you're breaking into your panel by bending the lead back gently if it allows it. Now if it doesn't, there is another way, that if you snip into the top really carefully, but this is then you get putting pressure onto the near the glass. So I've used my nips, and then you can like sardine can the lead. So you roll that back. So you can see now it's taken the face of the lead off and exposed where the cement is. You can then sort of work that out. If you peeled round to try and get a piece out to loosen it, that's one way, but this panel seems to be letting me do that like that. And so now I can use that bit of lead to bend, and that will just loosen the cement and then out. That goes up there. So it's basically nipping away at the lead and to get into your glass pieces, and just being really careful. Don't rush it, because if you rush, that's when you're most likely to break bits. Now if we just go over to these pieces over here, so you can see with the glass there's some snap bits here. Now I'm going to be replacing all these with new pieces, and replacing those with new pieces, so all the pattern stays to how it was when it was first made. But you could straighten these off where the cracks are straight, leave a little bit of a grind up gap for your heart of your lead, and put another small piece of lead in. So on the pattern you'll get extra bits of lead in there if you don't want to match the glass up, or you want to keep as much original glass in the piece as you can. So I'd do that, so it'd still look like a deliberate border, but they wouldn't maybe true to the original pattern. So that's one way. But on this one we've got glass that matches this, so I'll cut new bits so it will stay to the original pattern. So the next bit of the process will be to replace the broken bits of glass I've got. So I've got a piece over here on the pattern. So this is a broken bit that I've sellotaped together. So you've got two choices. If you haven't got the piece already to help you do it, you've got the rubbing lines here. So with the piece sellotaped together, you'll have to see if that is it within the lines, which it is. So I know that once that's leaded back together, that'll fit in. But if I hadn't got this piece of glass here, I could use the lines I've got drawn here from the rubbing and cut a piece of glass within that, and that should go back together. Now this panel was quite badly damaged at the bottom bit here. You can see where this lead bends. So when I come to lead these, I'll probably lead them all up from the top of the panel, and I'll talk about that later on when we come to leading and why I've done that. But that was straight, down here was bent. So I'm really going to have to use the glass I've stuck together there as my template. So I've checked that I've stuck it together right, so it will fit. I'll then get a piece of paper, and there's my piece of glass. Anywhere on a bit of paper, pencil, or you can use a fine padding pencil. But what I make sure is I do a little scribble, so I've got a bit of a chisel point on the end of my pencil, so when I'm going along the edge it is actually touching the glass, so it's not got the thickness of the pencil tip. So that is right up to the glass there if I put it at an angle. So when I come to cut this out on the glass, it will be a match. So I've done that there, and there's my cutting pattern. So I'll find the piece of glass that matches that. I've got my piece of glass here now that's my match for this piece here that I'm cutting. And then I'm lining this up. So I'm using the square edge there of the glass to line up with the square edge of the piece there. And I drew around that piece rather than drawing on the lines or using this as the pattern to cut my glass, because it's distorted here from where the bad damage was. So even though I squashed it flat, this is still a bit out of kilter. So rather than copying that and then transferring the bent lead line, I'm using the glass there to give me the right line. So cutting this, here's my glass cutter. I'm going to cut this small piece first here and then come across the glass there. So holding my glass cutter. A little nick back. So I'm cutting just on the inside of that pencil line because that's, so I know it'll be right. I get to there and I'll come across here to there. So, fingers crossed. So I've now got that bit there. So that's all on there. I'm going to cut this piece now. I'm moving that around. Still checking that's in place. I'm going to cut this now from here, and I've moved it around so when I'm cutting, my elbow's moving into space, and that makes it easier to cut, because if I was trying to cut that way, see, it makes it difficult. So, backwards nick again. Keeping a constant pressure on. And off the end there. Yeah. Just doing a gentle tweak all the way along there. And there we go. So I'm just going to check this on the pattern because I'm just checking that that's where I've drawn on there. There's two. It doesn't joint the lead on this bit. It runs next to each other. So where I've got that goes into the piece. So that'll be covered by the solder. So I know I can just square that bit off, and we'll be fine there. Take that off, and then just a little. Now, because that's a tiny bit, you could always use your Grossin pliers to do that. And that's that there, ready to go back in the panel. So I'll place that over here. And it's ready to go. So on the pieces that are all broken here, I'll continue. What I'll do is I'll do all the yellow ones, so they're all then done. This out of the 3 panels is actually not the worst damaged, so I haven't got too much of these to replace, but I have got the edging to replace along here. So there's these bits. So I'm going to get on and do that now because that's quite easy. It's cutting strips and then just measuring them to length. So I'll either use the original piece of glass or the lines on the pattern. So we've cleaned all the pieces up now and cut new pieces of glass, so the time is to lead it back together. It's very much the same as leading a normal stained glass panel. The one bit of advice I'd give is when you've looked at the panel when you were taking it apart, you need to be thinking about how the panel went back together. So you can see here, I'm leading the panel upside down. Usually, I'd maybe lead a panel the way you'd look at it from one corner and work way out, but I looked at this and it's this interesting middle part on here because it's got this long section of clear glass. It sort of acts as a lock and locks the middle in, so if I'd started leading up from this corner, it would have just made it a bit more tricky getting that round bit in. So I've literally started at this corner and come up, put that in, and I'm going to lead now the middle section up, and then once that's all leaded up, this piece of glass just slots in there and locks it all in. If I tried to do it the other way, it'd be a lot more difficult because you're sort of building up from the thick end. So it's just things like that to think about. And when you're leading it up, is to make sure that the lead's sitting roughly on the rubbing pattern, well, as nicely on the rubbing pattern that you've got, and don't be tempted to jam it all up hard because some of the old glass may be cut quite loose. It's quite surprising how not in the lead cane some old glass is. It's the cement that's actually holding it in. So it's just be wary of that and make sure you stick to so it finishes up at your final size that you've measured off the frame it's coming out if it's going back into a frame. So that's really leading up. I'm going to get on and do a bit now, and after that we cement up, which is usual, and finish pattern. Right, so the panels now are almost near their final stage. I've soldered this one together and cemented the other side. We've got other videos on YouTube about soldering and leading up if you want to take a look at those. So it's just the same as if we would do a commission, except we're using the old glass for the repair. So I've cemented one side and now I'm going to cement the other. When we're cementing, I like to leave the cement at least 4 hours between either side, and that just allows it to go off a bit, so when you're squidging it all into the gaps, you're not literally just feeding putty through and through the lead. It's got a little bit of resistance then, and you get a better seal. And when you're cleaning up as well, it doesn't tend to drag the cement out from the lead cane, and also it doesn't drag, so you get little fine cracks in the cement. And if you leave those in without polishing them off with a brush, that can capillary water into your panel. So it's all those things that attention to detail really. So I'll leave it about 4 hours, clean it up. If it's colder weather, I'll leave it longer, clean it, turn it over, and then I'll cement the other side. So I'll get the cement open. So for applying the cement in this jar, I have my little nail brush. There it is. And I keep that in some white spirit that's in the jar, so that stays damp and easy to work. This is almost at the end of its usability, because you can see it was like that, and now the bristles are very short. So I might treat myself today to a new brush. But I'm going to use this one for now. I've got my cement. Give it a stir. And then I'll start cementing the panel. So as the final parts of the process of the restoration is the cementing now. I will then put whiting onto this. And after the whiting, I'll leave it and clean it up. And then give it a final polish. And then I'll leave the panels flat for about a week to actually go off and stiffen harder, so they're not green when they're being fitted back into their frames. And I've also, as part of the restoration, I've scratched into the lead which panel goes with which frame, because I'm not fitting the panels into the frames later. I've scratched onto these. It's actually on the other side of this panel, but I'm going to get on now and start cementing. If you have any questions, please email them in and we'll try and answer them. And after I've cemented this, you'll see the final panels finished. Okay, that's the last panel done. I've just given it a little polish now and a check for any other bits that need picking out. I've also checked to make sure all the cement's in place, like any bits haven't picked out or brushed out when it was drying when I cleaned it, and done those so it's all nice and waterproof. And that's it. So that's the 3 panels done.